Hi everyone, my name's Owen. I'm going to be talking about different communication styles and kind of what that means. I'm going to be talking a lot from a personal perspective and also based on a little bit of research that I have done, and we're just going to crack straight into it. There we go. So about me, we've already had my intro. So when people ask me who I work for, I like to use Facebook's old relationship status. It's complicated. I'm employed by Microsoft, but I work for GitHub. Historically, that happened for kind of weird reasons, which is kind of fun. I'm autistic. We've had some talk already. I've really enjoyed the conference so far. There's a couple of times has been mentioned kind of self-identification as neurodiverse. And it's taken me a long time to be able to say I am autistic because I am not diagnosed. And I went through a number of kind of levels. I used to say I might be autistic, to I think I'm autistic, and then probably autistic. So my journey came very much from my daughter's diagnosis, and we're very similar. So I went through a journey with her when she was diagnosed, and it made me realize that a lot of my problems, especially growing up, stem from my autism. And like I have coping mechanisms now. I'm an adult, and I've like learned ways to deal with my life, and I don't feel like I need to get a diagnosis and go through that to be able to say that I'm autistic. So it's really nice to be able to see other people talking about that and framing it in a really nice way. So that's been lovely. I have I've watched a lot of Star Trek, especially during the pandemic. My wife and I started rewatching it, and we just finished DS9, watching it very slowly and enjoying it. So there's a lot of Star Trek pictures during this talk. I've tried to pick them for specific reasons. Feel free to reach out to me afterwards if you want to know why any of them have been chosen. I work for the accessibility team at GitHub. I'm obsessed with making things more accessible for folk. It's a really rewarding and interesting, complicated job. And I also have aphantasia. If you don't know what aphantasia is, that's when you can't see pictures in your mind. So my thought patterns are predominantly narrated in my head. It's my own voice talking. I often wonder if aphantastic is a phrase. If it's not, it is now. So I am aphantastic. So what do I mean by a communication difference? And I'm going to talk a lot in this talk about behaviors, and I'll talk about why that is on the next slides. But things like eye contact, tone of voice. We're also going to talk about some of the difficulties that might be caused by differences in communication, and we're going to talk about your preferred methods of communication and things like that. And just a little trigger warning, there's lots of pictures of people on these slides. Some of them may appear to be looking directly at you. I know people are sometimes less comfortable with eye contact than others, so if that is the case, then please be aware that's going to happen. All right, so why are we going to talk about behaviors when we're talking about communication? You may or may not have heard this kind of statistic in use that 90% of communication is non-verbal. Now that actually stems from some research in the 60s by Mehrabian and Wiener and Mehrabian and Ferris in 1967, and it's more complicated than that, as these sort of statistics often are. So their study was looking at how important non-verbal communication is when the non-verbal aspect and the verbal aspect were opposed. So when someone was communicating something, but the sort of non-verbal aspect was different to the verbal aspect, and they found that 55%, sorry, of the information was from kind of body language, 38% was from tone and tone of voice and things like that, and then only 7% was actually the words that were spoken. That's super interesting. Obviously, it's just a study with sort of statistics, so a different conversation is going to have different levels, but it is very clear that non-verbal communication is super important. And the reason that's important to understand, I think, is that, for example, I cannot read body language at all. I am almost predominantly going to judge you on the words you say. So this doesn't apply to my way of understanding the world. And I find it very difficult to navigate situations that have a high proportion of kind of non-verbal communication in them. Um, so that is something to be very aware of. Be direct, is what I'm saying when you're talking to me. So we're going to go through some of the things that might, some of the behaviors, some of the facets that might cause problems in communication. Eye contact is a big one for me. I've been working remote for a long time now, maybe 5 or 6 years, I think. I don't know. And so I'm very lucky to be able to pick and choose my social interactions a little bit more carefully, and not to have to go into an office every day. I can position my camera just here and make sure that half of my monitor has the information on it, and then it appears as though I'm giving you eye contact when in actual fact I'm just looking at a particular area of my screen. So something to be very aware of is that not everyone is comfortable with direct eye contact, not just in person, but also online. Sometimes if I start to feel uncomfortable, I will look out of the window over here. I will still be listening and talking to you, but I will be looking just at my garden. And I think one of the problems here is that we're taught from a very young age that eye contact is important. And I have done this myself before my daughter was diagnosed, and before I learned more about neurodiversity and autism specifically. If I was telling my child off, I would make sure she was looking at me, and that is an incredibly uncomfortable thing to do. And I feel very guilty that I used to behave like that until I learned better. So just knowing that is very important, that you shouldn't judge someone because they're not looking you directly in the eyes is not a sign of being untrustworthy. And it's also been shown from research of brain scans and things that it's actually a physical brain difference that causes this problem. Tone of voice is this is a very personal one to me. So I very often sound sarcastic when I intend to sound sincere. We have a saying in my household that if I sound sarcastic, then I mean it, and if I sound like I mean it, then I'm being sarcastic, and that is pretty true. Um, I also have an issue with sort of enthusiastic tone of voice. If I get incredibly enthusiastic about something, then I think the emotions become too much, and I instinctively push them down. So I start to become more monotone, and I sound less enthusiastic. So sometimes I might sound bored, even though I really care about something, and that's kind of hard to navigate. And people also find it hard to read tone of voice as well as regulating their own tone of voice. I put some further reading on here if anyone wants it. It's at the articulateautistic.com has some great articles on these sorts of things. Intensity is another issue that folk can. So there's this phrase, special interests, and some people don't like it, some people do. I really like the term special interests. Um, it makes me happy, and obviously Star Trek is one of my special interests. And I don't have an encyclopedic knowledge of Star Trek. It's not that kind of thing. I cannot keep facts in my head, but I can get very excited when I talk about my special interests. So I like artificial intelligence, for example. I like virtual reality, all these sorts of things that I will become more intense as I talk about them. And sometimes that can be a little bit over the top, and it can feel kind of, I don't know, frightening is the wrong word, but it can feel like someone is engaging too much, and that's okay. You can even ask someone if you can take a step back. I have big problems with boundaries. I need a lot of personal space. Um, so I have experienced this from both sides. And I think communicating your barriers and comfort levels is very important. I am a very literal person. This is one of the few pictures, Star Trek pictures, that I felt conflicted about putting because, like, obviously Data's an android, and I feel like I shouldn't relate to Data at all. But there are episodes where he is incredibly literal, and that makes me feel seen. um, One of the biggest problems I have personally is when I take something literally, or explain something literally, and it's taken as a non-literal thing, and that can sometimes lead to long periods of miscommunication. Um, and I would encourage everyone to try and be as literal as possible, especially in the workplace when you're trying to communicate. Um, Stimming is an interesting one. So stimming is when you like move or do something to indicate that you're stressed or excited or to calm yourself down. Um, there are lots of forms of stimming. One of the ones I do is I do this with my fingers, and that's a nice subtle one that I can do while I'm walking around or people don't necessarily see. Sometimes I will stroke myself to calm myself down. If I'm stressed, and I do this a lot on calls, I just did it, and I will touch my face in places, and I can see myself doing this. One of the problems with this sort of thing is if I catch myself doing it, then the conversation in my head will cease to become solely about what I'm talking about or what I'm listening to, and it will also become about how many times I'm doing the thing that I've noticed that I'm doing. And this is also true of eye contact. So if I'm having an important conversation with someone and I feel like I should try and maintain eye contact, then the conversation I have becomes partly about talking to that person. And it also becomes partly about how many times have I looked this person in the eye? Have I looked at them for too long now? Should I look away? Should I look back again? Is this an acceptable amount of eye contact so that I am appearing to behave like a human being? Um, and and that distracts you from the conversation. So, like on a call, when I'm working remotely, staring out of the window immediately takes me away from that worry, so that I can concentrate on what's being said and what I'm hearing and what I want to say. Um, and and that really helps me to kind of to navigate that problem. Um, Stimming, on the other hand, is a more difficult thing. I think you need to be more accepting of people making strange motions or doing things that you might not expect, motions or things like that, um, because often we can't help it. And I've over time, like most of my communications nowadays happen like from the top, and so underneath, where are we? About here, you can't see what I'm doing. Um, so I have developed, I think, some stims that I can do that you can't see. But if you meet me in person, you might see me doing those. You might notice those, and just accepting that that's a thing and it's fine, is very helpful for me. And that we've got some fiddling. I've noticed a few of these on some calls, and also on some of the presentations and talks today. I really like fiddly things. Um, I will share some on my desk. So I have this, which is a guitar slide. It's made of metal and it feels really nice. A lot of my fiddling things are sensory, so this gets cold really easily, and then I can just kind of hold it, and that's really good. I have an infinity cube, but this is quite noisy, so I tend not to use this when I'm on calls, but I really like it. Um, what else do we have? I have a series of magnets, quite strong magnets, that also get cold really nicely, and I can click those around. The hematite ones are strong enough that I can put one on one side of my hand and it will attract the one on the other side of my hand, so I can fiddle around with that. I have a Rubik's Cube, which I just recently learnt to solve. Hooray. First time in my life I can now solve them, which is pretty exciting. Just loads of things. Squishy things, a tomato timer. What else have we got? Lots. Some cuddly toys and things to hug. I tend not to do that when I'm on calls. Yeah. Um, what am I saying about this? Basically, it's fine. If I'm fiddling with something or paying attention to something, it's really interesting to see Kevin talking about something similar on the previous talk. Um, it's perfectly okay. I'm still listening to you. I'm still paying attention. It could in fact be helping me to pay attention and to give everything to this discussion. So just accept that it's a thing. So this kind of leads us to something called the double empathy problem. Now, if you've not heard of the double empathy problem, it's a term that was coined to describe the difficulty with it's. I've only ever heard it used in the autistic community, but it probably has applications outside of that. But the general idea is, for a long time, I thought I did not have empathy, and it actually took my manager a little while ago, sort of mid last year, to call me out on this and say, you keep saying you don't have empathy or you struggle with empathy, but I've seen you do it, I've seen you have empathy. So why do you say that? And we talked it through, and it turned out that I do have empathy, but I have empathy very specifically for people that I can understand and identify with. So I find it hard to empathize with people who are not neurodiverse, I have discovered. Um, and the double empathy problem is the idea that both of these groups, both of these communities are empathetic, but they struggle to empathize with each other. So I'm going to use the term normal people, but there we go, non-neurodiverse people. That's neurotypical people. Let's use that term. That's a much better term. Will empathize with each other, but there will be more othering of neurodiverse communities. And inside the neurodiverse community, it's incredibly supportive, empathetic, and just lovely. We have a group called Neurocats at GitHub, and it's a very welcoming, friendly, and helpful place. It's a beautiful community, and the idea of double empathy is that they struggle to understand each other, those two kind of communities, and this has been shown with studies. It has been seen happening, and it's a really interesting phenomenon. And I asked the question, can you avoid it? And I think it's a natural thing. I think the reason why it's kind of this often said thing that autistic people don't have empathy is because there are more neurotypical people in the world than there are autistic people. So they say that we don't have empathy, whereas in reality, everyone has empathy to different degrees and for different groups of people. Um, and I don't think we can avoid this, but we can recognize it and we can try and remember it when we are struggling to identify with someone that is different to us. We can try and take a step back and think about seeing things through their eyes. And I think that helps. So now we're going to talk about communication preferences a little bit. So there are a number of ways to communicate, especially in this remote world. Hooray for remote work. My life got infinitely better the moment I stopped going into an office every day. So I like meeting people in person occasionally on my terms. That's kind of cool. Maybe once or twice a week is my peak. I like communicating async over Slack. Often I will fall back to talking to someone asynchronously in Slack while we're working together in code or whatever, and we'll have kind of pings back and forth. And I find that really productive and useful. And it also forces people to be direct and clear. People tend to be more literal when they're writing things down than when they're speaking verbally. And so I find that great. Ironically, I'm better with video calls than audio calls. I think I feel more comfortable if I can see the person. And this is a personal preference. So given the choice of all of these things, I think I would opt for async text communication as a first choice. And then I would probably opt for video, and then voice, and then in person. That would be my my preference. And you can ask people, like, we'll touch on this in the kind of what managers can do. You can ask them what their preferences are or how they would like to communicate, and I think that is a very helpful and healthy thing to do. I wanted to write some tips for people who communicate differently. This is something I really struggle with, something I have spent time improving. I think the biggest advice I can give you is try to be kind to yourself. I used to think I was the calmest, least angry person in the world, and then I had kids, and then I discovered that I was the most repressed, um, pushing down my anger person in the world. And the minute I let all that go and started to be kind to myself, I discovered this whole new world. And I think if you take one thing from this talk, let it be just being kind to yourself and those around you. I've attached a lot of blame to myself in the past for communicating badly or mistaking what someone said, taking them literally. And I think it's not your fault. It's a very important message. If you misunderstand someone, no one is to blame. Seek clarification. Take misunderstandings with a light heart and try and laugh about it if you can. And also, I would say, try and be honest as often as you can. Like, you have to feel psychologically safe to be honest with people, and I think it's very important to live that and to try and create spaces where honesty can thrive. So some tips for managers. So I just mentioned psychological safety. This is such an important thing for the culture of a company, a culture of a team. Creating spaces where people can be honest and say what's bothering them. People can talk openly is really good. Some tips on specific ways of communicating. Don't ever say, "Can we talk?" or "Do you have a minute?" I will then assume that I'm being fired up until the point at which we talk and I realize it's about something that it was not important. Always say something like, "I want to talk about this thing. How's your schedule looking between now and this time?" So um, if you ask me to talk about something, I will think that you want to talk about it immediately, and it is the most important thing in the world, and maybe I'm in trouble. Whereas if you tell me you want to talk about something in specific and that you need to talk to me about it by a particular date, then I can prioritize. I can be calm and measured and know what the conversation is about. I can prepare in my own head, and that's all good. And also, it's a really nice thing to do is you ask for a preferred way of talking about something. So um, sometimes my manager will pop up and say, "I'd like to talk to you about this. Um, I need to know by kind of this time. Please do that." And finally, act with patience and kindness. So, in summary, be kind, be honest, assume good intentions if you can. Sometimes that is not possible. Not everyone in the world is a nice person, but it's always good to come from that position. Learn about yourself. Self-learning is learning. It's an important task, and people are different, and that is a good thing. So embrace those differences. There we go. That is the end of my talk. Thank you for listening, and thank you for putting on this amazing conference. It's been